remember? Okay,
there we go.
All right, thanks. All right, cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's panel, provocatively titled Privacy is Dead. We have three wonderful guests and me. And we're gonna discuss the concept of privacy just from a technical angle a little bit, but more importantly, I guess, from a social angle and what this means broadly for society, especially related to what's coming out related to COVID at the moment. So it's very, very relevant to our lives at the moment, and want to bring together hopefully some conflicting views and some difference of opinions, or if there isn't any, then I'll try and play the antagonist. But instead of me telling people why you guys are here, can I ask you to briefly state who you are and why specifically privacy is important to you? And we'll start with Arwen.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence, and a big thanks to the previous panels. I really enjoyed those discussions. So for me personally, I've been in the blockchain space for a while, and in that time, I've come to see the concept of identity really as a gateway to broader data ethics, as it often is the primary point of capturing information. And obviously, privacy plays a huge role in that. So that's my interest.
Thanks, Guy. What about you?
First of all, as well, great to be here. Great event, both last year and now, even though we are all here virtually. I've been in the I guess I've been a privacy proponent for quite a long time. I first of all, as a grad student and researcher at MIT, my focus was really how can we solve the dichotomy between enjoying our privacy, enjoying our freedoms, not giving away our data, but still making use of it. That has actually then led to the creation of Enigma, which I have founded and now running as the CEO. Guess that's my background mainly.
Thanks. Finally, you, Isaac.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Great to be in the company of some awesome panelists and a great topic. I am a co-founder at Tide. Tide is a blockchain project that's been running now for about almost 3.5 years. We developed a technological protocol that seamlessly provides consumers with absolute control over their personal data privacy and businesses with a commercial incentive to adopt privacy-preserving technology. And I think for me, the question of privacy really comes down to your personal data privacy, because that's really the area that I'm sort of most familiar with. And that's not to discount the fact that privacy is clearly that protecting privacy is also protecting human rights and identity. That's really important. It's also not to discount the fact that protecting your personal data privacy is also protecting probably the biggest or the fastest growing asset class of our lifetime, which is our personal data that is just in such demand. But privacy is also about preserving freedom, but with accountability. We know that breaches in privacy is not just about profiteering, it's about identity theft, it's about election rigging, it's about mass opinion leveraging, it's about stealing our mind share. And protecting that privacy is important. It's important on a social perspective, on a commercial perspective, but we shouldn't allow ultimate privacy to remove accountability. So from my end, my interest really lies in that tension between privacy and accountability, and how do we get technology that creates that magic balance?
So let me put forward a provocative statement then related to that, and Arwen, you go first on giving it a bash. So some argue, or in this case, I'm arguing, privacy is fundamentally at odds with the benefits that come from aggregated data sets for algorithms to comb through. And there's going to be huge benefits from aggregating up all of that data and finding patterns that we never know existed before. So how can society reconcile the need to give up some freedoms for those collective benefits?
I think that in essence, there are kind of two planes to this automation. So I think there is a version of this that obviously focuses on profit. So companies compiling and selling these data sets in order to achieve a certain bottom line. And then I think the second plane focus more on power and control. And the contact tracing apps that we are currently seeing in the pandemic are an example of governments applying those same principles. Now, what I think is really interesting is that in the first case, a broader awareness of the end goal of surveillance capitalism shone much more light on the process itself. So for example, what is the extent of data capture? How is the data being treated once it's being captured, et cetera, et cetera. So think of de-identification, edge computing, decentralization, differential privacy, a whole range of techniques. But what we're seeing in the second case, however, is that in the contact tracing play, that the end goal almost received more attention than the process itself. The argument almost going like, okay, if it's noble enough, almost, the process wouldn't really matter. If the why is strong enough, who cares about the how, right? So what I would argue is that in the first case, we might need to start wondering if we want this mechanism. And in the second case, we might need to start wondering that if it is the general direction that we're heading, what terms and conditions and checks and balances are actually applied and enforced to ensure that this holds in the long term, and then that this end goal is kind of an end goal in pure form, and it won't be changed along the way as a justification for the process.
Interesting. And maybe Guy, what do you think about that? The sort of the why. I mean, you must think about this a lot with what you do. That the process, but if the why is strong enough, that can be partly sufficient. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. And actually, COVID is a great example, and we've seen that in the country that I'm living at. All of a sudden we got into immediate lockdown, social distancing. Obviously, no arguments there that was a prudent move and the right thing. But at the same time, the government kind of laid out very briefly a very I'd say onerous plan where they said we are now tracking the equivalent of the local FBI would now be tracking everyone's phones 24/7, just to keep you safe. Now, look, this is an extreme situation, right? Like, we had to move fast. People need to move fast. Like, no one argues the benefits. No one argues the benefits of using big data for this kind of tasks. But what kind of oversight do you put in? What kind of limitations do you put out? These things moved so quickly that there was a serious and justified uproar against abusing these measures as time moves forward. So maybe it's the right move for the next 2 weeks, but then where are the checks and balances? Who actually comes out and say, look, now we had enough? And I live in a country where we've been declared as in an emergency state since we were founded, decades ago. So who puts the stop? And I think that is where the risk lies. And I think that's what Arwen is saying, and I completely agree with. You need proper policies. You need proper checks and balances. That has to come from the people themselves. And unlike the title of this of this session, which privacy is dead, I think privacy is not dead, because once the government announced it, and again they had a good reason to announce this, within 2 weeks there was a public uproar which led to Congress, the local Congress, having oversight over these, and eventually, as soon as things got better, just canceling that program. That was on the policy hand. And then on the technical end, I think for us as entrepreneurs, as innovators, as people who care about privacy, we need to show and we need to educate others that there are better solutions. So when I saw the government issuing such a plan, we as Enigma, as a company, went out and built a privacy-preserving contact tracing application called SafeTrace, more of a platform, more of an API that other applications can tap into, that proves, you don't need to use surveillance capitalism. You can actually achieve the same accuracy, the same results around ensuring that you contain this pandemic using contact tracing without actually sacrificing people's privacy.
Yeah, and so that's interesting about the entrepreneurs creating the required tools, and I suppose the gap, Isaac, a little bit is the entrepreneurial world just doesn't have the same links with the policymakers as the bigger companies, whether it be Cisco, whether it be Apple or Google. So how have you, I know you've spoken with the Australian government and follow this closely. How do we close that gap between the entrepreneurial world and privacy preserving technologies and who policymakers see and who they interact with?
I think that's a great question, Lawrence. I think there are a couple of components to that. One is framing the question, saying that privacy is at odds with the benefits from aggregated data sets means that our mind goes to, well, how do we limit the impact of our privacy loss? I think the question should be, does privacy have to be at odds with the benefits from aggregate data sets? And if we frame the question in that way, it really does change the mindset, changes the mindset of how we approach the problem. And I believe all of us agree that privacy does not have to be at odds with the benefits that come from centralization or the benefits that come from aggregate data sets. And this translates not just to us as entrepreneurs or to individuals, but it actually percolates back up to government thinking. And it forms the strategy of how we deal with things going forward. Because in an emergency time like what we had now, the reality is that it's unrealistic to expect government to turn around and to start to deal with entrepreneurs and innovative solutions. They're going to turn to something that's safe and solid and just minimizes the fallout of the impact and provides the most benefit with the least risk. The only way to really change that is to get government to have a look from a different perspective, and to do that in a forward-looking manner, so that guys like us and like Tide, like Enigma, like everyone that's working in this space can be part of what do we do for the next pandemic preparedness? How do we ensure that technology is there to enable the collection of mass data so that we can actually prevent or control or get on top of the pandemic without losing privacy? And when we start to look at things from that perspective, and we start to look at things from a future perspective, we realize that the safe and solid bets that government have had so far just simply don't address the challenges that the future brings.
That's I suppose the interesting thing about we focused on the government's I suppose approach to this, but another I suppose counterpoint and another argument for privacy is dead is, you mentioned the word earlier on, guys, surveillance capitalism, and again, I've seen the argument made, and in this panel I'm going to argue that surveillance capitalism has been a net benefit to society. Hear me out. Because we have billions of users using the internet, or at least, searching for the world's information or connecting with friends and peers for free, financial free, right? So it's free. So the question I always ask is, how can you serve billions of people for free, for them putting no money down, especially those living in less than $1 a day, how can they have access to these innovations without surveillance capitalism? I suppose what I'm asking here is, what is the business model then if privacy by design is built for all the infrastructure and there's no ads, there's no surveillance capitalism? What's the business model? How do we serve those people? I'm going to start with you, Guy, on that one, the easiest of the questions.
Well, I guess I think when it comes to a business model, we're still figuring things out, and we should, and we owe it to ourselves and to society to actually figure out sustainable business models. I think that is a tricky question. That said, we're already seeing signs of sustainable business models that don't actually put privacy and data utility at odds with each other. We have real businesses, hopefully like Enigma, but definitely like DuckDuckGo as a search engine goes, Brave where the browser goes, and a slew of others. So I disagree that these things need to be at odds here. I think there are solutions. On the technical side, we know the technology exists. We at Enigma, we're developing this technology. We're not the only ones. Before we started this conversation, we briefly touched OpenMind, or basically trying to build also APIs for federated machine learnings and other more of a edge computing type of machine learning algorithms. We're seeing more and more of these. We're actually seeing Google and Apple and others actually using a form of collecting data in a differentially private way into their data center. So there are definitely ways when it comes to technology to actually get the benefits from data while still protecting people's privacy. And there are definitely business already showing that there is a real merit to actually making money in a much more socially beneficial way from data that doesn't compromise privacy. So I think the solution, we're starting to see the solution. We're in a much better position now than we were 5 and 10 years ago. But I do think we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg. There will be a lot of work, and I think most of the work at this point is mostly educational at this point. There's still a lot of technical work, but I would put it like 30% technical, but 70% educational, and actually getting venture capitalists, organization, governments, big and small companies alike, to trying to find more creative ways to actually monetize data and provide social good without actually compromising privacy.
Interesting. Arwen, what do you think?
I agree with much of that. I think when you start tackling a question that is so complex, I think it benefits from a bit of structure. So I think it depends on where we locate the main fault with the current version of the internet that we've built, right? Do we judge tech companies for the fact that bad people have used private infrastructure for things such as disinformation campaigns? Or do we judge them for the fact that competition might be unfair via monopolization? Or are we actually upset about the fact that users are exploited by design? So do we find fault with the main business model? And I actually think for those three categories, there are different types of problems. So if we look at misusing private infrastructure, you're more looking at a governance problem. If you look at the monopolization problem, it's a government problem. And if you find fault with the business models, it really is a company's problem, because if in the long run a business model is going to be rejected by your users, perhaps on ethical or moral grounds, that is a problem for your competitive advantage. Then I think kind of the second complication that I want to add to this discussion is questioning what our ultimate goal is. Is the ultimate goal for the internet to be free? Or is the ultimate goal perhaps for the internet to be open? and is yet necessarily the same thing. So he's going to leave that there. And I do think that we can make some constructive steps now. So I think that the quickest wins are probably on process level. So I think governments can indeed issue guidelines on what can be captured, how to process set data, for example, biometrics, limit data linkability. We've seen a lot of talk about potentially unwinding certain mergers and acquisitions, introduce fairness in auditable algorithms, etc., etc. It's more of a damage control, short-term play. But in the longer term, I think we need completely different models. I definitely think we can put question marks with the fairness and the validity of the current model of an internet subsidized by ads. And where I think this ultimately ends up is a different paradigm around who controls and owns that data. So I think self-sovereign identity is definitely one expression of that. Collaborative blockchain ecosystems are another one. And I'm actually super bullish on these new types of data value systems because I think they are valid. But I do not think that only focusing on that is the right move here. I think we need to pursue both different tracks. And to what Issac was saying earlier, that includes conversations with governments.
That's yeah, that's a really good way of framing it, and that makes me think. And Isaac, as an entrepreneur building this, how do you reconcile that in your mind, in a sense of, you know, you're building a business that needs to ultimately generate revenues and profit, but also you have some goals that you want to bring privacy to everybody, but privacy is a public good, as a global good, because you think it's fundamental that we have that as individuals. I mean, that's a tension, right? How do you think about that, and how do you think about building a business to address that?
I actually think I think that when we're looking at this, and we look at it from a perspective of surveillance capitalism, we can't forget about the last word, which is capitalism, right? So there are actually many benefits to capitalism. It's really when we turn to exploitation and abuse that surveillance capitalism becomes bad, because all of us own an asset that is being surveilled every day. All of us own our personal data, and that asset continues to grow in value and in demand. How do you create a business case out of that is actually exactly what Tide is doing. What we are doing is saying that, you know, that's okay. People can want your data, and people can try and identify who you are and target you. But the process that we go about it today is so inefficient that there is so much wastage. If you as a consumer are actually able to control your data and to have the ability to decide who you'll share your data with and be part of that value chain, not only do you as a consumer start to be able to have a liquid asset, but the marketers that are trying to identify you are doing that in a way that is much more efficient. And by creating efficiencies, and those efficiencies arise when this asset is now a shared asset between yourself and the business that you've shared that data with. Today, that business says, you've given me your data, it's my asset. And so it sells it, it abuses it. And then us as consumers, well, we back away from any of the effects from that. We don't want to engage with agencies that are mining our data from businesses that we haven't given consent to. But if we have given express consent, we create efficiencies in this space. So it is actually very interesting when you say, I'm going to remove the need to trust, I don't need to trust this business. And suddenly by removing that need to trust, we create so many commercial opportunities that a business case exists for facilitating the emergence of these benefits, of these efficiencies, because consumers' data is not being mined and sold and abused and stolen. We can eliminate all that.
I think that keyword consent. at least when I've always thought about it as the end state, it's a public choice. So there are some people for which protecting all of their data is vital to them.
Yes.
I'm probably that person. I would rather not share anything at all, ever. On one end of the spectrum. The others is I get value from Facebook, Google, and I don't even think about it. It doesn't matter to me. And then, what you really want right now is a binary choice. Share everything or share nothing, although sharing nothing isn't really a choice. But what we want to do is give people options. So we want tools that give people consent to share granular types of data. For me, it feels like the end state is something around a tool that enables us to finely tune what's shared and with whom, and then revoke appropriately. And let's see how if we get there. But I'm glad that we're all here, hopefully investing and building and supporting those tools to be built. But that leads me to a question around what specific things are needed to enable that end state. So what sort of privacy innovations should we be looking at, should we be keeping an eye on, and maybe how this relates to what you're building, or even the most interesting things you've seen in academia or that other people are building. Maybe Isaac, if you want to talk about that, is there anything specific technologically that we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, I think there are quite a few things, some of which we're actively building or have built, and others which we are absolutely supporting. From a type perspective, we believe that you as a consumer should have the only key to decrypt your data. And so if you're holding your only key, the ability to create a decentralized key management system is absolutely critical. And that decentralized key management system, along with decentralized authentication, means that businesses can't get hacked. And when businesses can't get hacked, your personal data can't get stolen. So we believe that technological solutions around preserving data, around cybersecurity, around providing consumers with control of their data without some of the cumbersome UX experience that comes with blockchain today is critical. We're also huge supporters of technologies such as homomorphic encryption or differential privacy, and I think we're going to see a lot more in that space. The privacy tech space is exploding. And I think we're all lucky to be a part of it.
Thanks, Isaac. What about you, Guy? You're in Israel, where the home of encryption and privacy tech. Well, what's exciting out there?
Well, from an academic perspective, I think we're seeing new and new innovations every day. I think, in the first decade of the 2000s, we've seen an explosion in cloud technologies and big data technologies, which is obviously moved forward in the second decade. But I think the second decade, and as we are entering the third decade, I think I agree. Privacy preserving technologies are reaching critical mass. There are innovations that actually can keep up now with the level of big data. We at Enigma, that's our mandate, right? We're building privacy preserving computation technologies. We believe that if we give developers the ability to develop applications that are completely privacy preserving, end-to-end, where data is always encrypted, that's really the best way moving forward. Our primary, support is of the secret network. Up until yesterday, this was called the Enigma blockchain. That basically it's a blockchain environment that that allows you to write smart contracts, so basically decentralized applications. But the key point is that all of the data remains end-to-end encrypted. So for example, you could do a voting application, but where all the votes that users contribute are completely encrypted, and that obviously avoids things like oppression and bribery and all of that. And that blockchain has really outgrown Enigma, the company. So yesterday we decided to actually rebrand it with the community as the secret network, because really it allows you to hide and to keep your secret safe.
Guy, thank you. Arwen, final word, last 20 seconds or so. Sorry, but what's the most interesting?
That's okay.
Most interesting thing for you?
Look out for 3 big trends. Keep an eye on what's happening with contact tracing apps. Look out what's happening with central bank, digital currencies. Really, really important. Digital footprint of payments is not something that is trivial. And look out for a wider realization on governmental level that data has national security concerns, which might be a positive catalyst for introducing more rights with respect to privacy.
Excellent. I thought we were going to get cut off directly at 30, but we've gone on slightly. So excellent. So let me just finish with a quote that I love. Hopefully I don't get cut off, which is from Benjamin Franklin. They who can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. I'd love to mic drop and leave, but I don't know how to do that. But I'd like to thank everyone for their time here. I really appreciate it. I thought that was fascinating. I learned a lot. So I'm really appreciative of everyone's time. So thank you so much. And have a lovely rest of the day, everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.